Today I'm going to talk about building an automatic shaker for aerosol style paint cans. The best place to start is to figure out what type of motor you want to power the shaker. When it comes to using a drill, there's a couple different designs out there. I've seen a more recent one that kind of spins the can like that. I think a better motion would be one that would probably slowly spin it like this so you can still have the marble moving around on the inside. Amazon has a little product that attaches to the end of the drill and it converts the motion so you're still shaking the can like this, which I think is the best motion. That tool is about $45. Given the option, I think it'd be easier to start with a tool that already has the correct motion. I think either one of these, Jigsaw or the Sawzall, will do the job. My personal choice would be the Sawzall because it has a much longer stroke than the Jigsaw, and it's also just a much heavier tool, which I felt like I wouldn't burn it out shaking cans with it. One of the simplest designs would just be to use some hose clamps and clamp a can onto a regular saw blade. It works pretty well actually, it's just not that convenient. Amazon sells this product. It's basically the same idea as this, except it has a clamp on the top with a knob to tighten it, and that would be a lot more convenient and a lot more practical than rigging up something like this. They're about $30. I was looking for more of a shop-based model that could just stay in the shop and I wouldn't have to hold the tool while it was shaking. I felt like if it's going to be automatic, I'd rather just have it sit on the floor and shake the cans while I do something else. And thinking about holders, I had some of these. These are just like $3, $4 caulking guns, and I felt like that would be a really good starting point. This is what I came up with. I'll go over some of the modifications that I made. Started with the longest blade that I had. I just needed a way of adapting it to fit in the Sawzall. So this is a 12-inch blade, and I found out that I needed to strengthen it up. This is a piece of aluminum, probably about 1 foot long, maybe about 1/8 of an inch thick. It's just riveted together. To adapt it over, I just used 2 pieces of this inexpensive angle iron and bolted it on. So now it'll attach to the machine. A couple other modifications needed to be made for holding the can. So I ended up not using any of this. I ended up taking it off and I made a larger version. This is about 1/8 of an inch thick, and welded that on, as well as a little retainer piece on the top. I figured out that this hole needs to be about 2-inch diameter to fit a standard can, and that's the way that I would normally clamp them in to shake them. Now, I wasn't able to use the factory rear mount either. Fortunately on this one, it's screwed on, which is helpful because you do need to get the rod out. So I just unscrewed this and then ended up making a plate. So this is about 1/8 of an inch, just the same as the front. It's drilled and tapped, and then it's got the retainer on the top. And then on the back side, I welded this rod on because this would tend to rotate, and that's all I needed to do for the rear side. And like I said, it needs to come off because this rod has to come out, and you'll see why in just a second. This is the base for the machine. So I started with a 1-inch by 8-inch wide, 44-inch long piece of plywood. Everything else is just 2x4s. I just needed to build it around the Sawzall, and this is clearanced in here so I can slide in the saw and still click the quick release. So I wanted the can supported, so the holder of the can is kind of suspended and the only weight on the saw is really moving side to side. On this end it's just a 2x4, and I use little brass adapter fittings like this. They're smooth on the inside. I just kind of glued them into the side, and that way this rod can go in there, and I just put a little bit of oil on that. One issue I had was the whole unit moving along the floor when it was shaking, and tried a bunch of different ways, and it was better not to try to secure it down or weight it down some way. So it's best to just kind of let it shake in place, and these little foam pipe insulators work really well. They're just screwed on, and it just kind of almost keeps it in place, but it doesn't try to tie it down. It works pretty well. Now I try not to tighten it too tight because it'll actually rotate while it's shaking, which I think is a pretty nice feature. One other tip, for whatever reason, the color of the can is always on this sticker on the side. So I end up writing on the bottom because it will end up taking off the entire sticker. One last thing is this little wedge that I'm using as a speed control, and it just slides in, and I determined kind of the RPMs that seem to work the best. You don't want it just flat out, but this way I could kind of rotate it a little bit and it could lightly change the speed, and then it could just stay the same for however many cans I need to shake. And for turning it on, I'm usually plugged into an outlet power strip with a switch, so that's how I flip it on. At the speed I had it set at, which I think is ideal, it's probably about half the speed that the Sawzall can run. It only takes about a minute to fully shake the cans. I like to use these little clocks here. I just set it 1 minute and it just counts down with a buzzer so I can hear it, and I can run and change the can. So it takes less than 7 minutes to shake 6 cans, and I don't have to hold any machine while it's operating. You can take a look at the bottom of the can. You can see little indentions where the marble is shaking and hitting the bottom of the can. It shakes pretty vigorously. Here's something else that I started using most every time I would use that can shaker. It's just an old aluminum cook pot. It's about 10-inch diameter, 7 inches deep. And this is just 14 gauge copper wire. I just bent it, shaped it, and hot glued it so I can hold 8 cans in there. I mainly built the can shaker because I was doing a lot of projects and I was having inconsistent finishes. One of the variables is definitely the shaking. The other variable is the temperature. Things that work in the summer don't work as well in the winter when they're cold. So I started warming up the cans in this container here, and basically all I would do is fill it up most of the way with pretty hot tap water. And over time, the cans were cold to start. Usually by the time I pulled them out, they would just be slightly warm to the touch. And that's all you want. You don't want hot cans, you just want them slightly warm. But that means year round you'd be able to shake them and you get the same spray performance, because really you have a lot more issues in the cold. I really think for warming cans, using the water method is the best. I've put them in kind of a heat drying box before, and it's really easy to lose track of time and get them a little bit too warm. And you really don't want to get, especially a full can, too warm and then shake it on that shaker. One time I had a can, it was probably a little too warm to the touch, and what happens is it actually pops out the bottom. I've never had one fail, but I kind of figured through trial and error what the best temperature is, and it's just very slightly warm, especially on a full can. Something else I want to add is talking about actually spraying with the cans. This is kind of an older style can, but it really wears on your finger, especially if you have to spray a few cans at a time. So a lot of more modern cans have either easier to spray versions of this or this wide version here. It's definitely easier to spray, but you still wear out that one finger that you normally use. I've tried out a lot of different can holders on the market, and this one's always been the best. It's not perfect, but I feel like it's the best overall. A lot of the problems that I was having is some of them are clip style, and they just kind of snap onto the top of the can, and over time that clip would wear out and they would come off. I like this Rustoleum style. It's a much stronger clamp, however these are shaped. I've never had a problem with them coming off the cans, but it's easy to use, and you can use multiple fingers to spray with. So you can spray for quite a while and you don't really feel it. Now, as you can see, some modifications. I ended up trimming the sides here because they would build up a little bit with paint. So I cut those down and then strapping it together, because over time you do end up pulling the housing apart. But this one has literally sprayed hundreds of cans, and for a few dollars I think this is the best option in spray can triggers. There are probably some people wondering if any of this is necessary because they've never shaken a can more than a few seconds and it's always been fine. And in some cases, it's not that big of a deal. You don't need a setup like this. Yeah, an example would be like this cheap can of green paint I just use on outdoor yard tools. I just need them to have a coat of paint so they don't rust. I'm not going to set up the whole shaker to shake a can like this. Another example would be gloss clear. I don't really think you have to shake a can like this all that much. Solid colors, clear color. There's not a lot to really shake up. I think shaking it by hand for a couple of minutes like they recommend is good enough. I've never had a problem with these cans. It's a little bit different when you start talking about matte, semi-gloss type finishes because they're basically a gloss with an impurity in there. So that impurity is floating around. And if it's not shaken really well and distributed evenly, then you will not get that matte finish. I was experiencing a couple different issues with these, trying to paint a variety of different things, and especially if you're spraying multiple coats of this. And I would have some cans where no matter how much I shook by hand, it seemed like I would lose a lot of the matte initially, and then if I sprayed more coats, they'd be more gloss. So it would mess up what I was trying to work on. And then other cases, trying to spray a little bit larger areas, and you can see each stroke as you spray, and some of them have more matte than others, so you end up with a streaked finish. And the only way I could prevent that is with warming the cans and then shaking them on the can shaker. One of my favorite type finishes, especially for outdoor type things, from mailboxes to lampposts, things like that, is this Rust-Oleum Textured. It holds up really well, but what I was running into is I wasn't able to get through the entire can. I had quite a few cans. Say you buy 3-4 cans for a project thinking that's all you need. Well, I would have some cans where I would lose the propellant fairly quickly, and there would still be a sizable amount of paint in the can. And it wasn't until I started shaking them a lot with a automatic shaker that I ended up actually being able to use the entire can. Another one of my favorite types of paint is Rustoleum Hammered, specifically the copper finish. It looks really good and it holds up, and it tends to hide a lot of imperfections because it is a pretty thick paint and it has this dimple type texture to it, so it hides scratches and things like that. I really like the paint, but if you look at the can, you can see how consistent that finish is, and that's pretty much what you would expect if you wanted to spray with it. A paint like this, it's a copper paint and it's got some metallic in it, but it also has like an oil type impurity in there, which kind of creates this separation, like it has oil in there, and it just kind of expands out and creates this nice texture. Well, all of that needs to be shaken really well if you want a smooth, consistent textured finish like they're showing on the can. And I was running into problems, especially painting larger pieces, where it was kind of like the matte clear, where you could start seeing different streaks and you could tell where your strokes were, and some of them would have a finer texture, and then you'd have these areas where you just had these big kind of globs almost, and it just didn't look right, and I couldn't ever get it right. And sometimes you'd be on the second, third coat and it would do it and then mess up the whole job. And once I started shaking them with an automatic shaker, and also I would start shaking them before each coat. So each can, if I did 3 coats, I would shake it 3 times. That made a world of difference, and I seldom, if ever, messed up anything because shaking was really the problem with getting these paints to look just like the top of the can. So I built this machine a couple years ago, and I've shaken hundreds and hundreds of cans with it. I was using it every day for a couple years, and the only thing I ever had to do was just add a little bit of oil. I was just using a little bit of 3-in-1. You could use maybe a little bit of grease right here. I never had any problems with the Sawzall. It never got warm. It never seemed like it was under any strain, and I still use it for other things because it just pops off. So I feel like it's a really good design that's been thoroughly tested, and it's definitely a worthwhile thing to make. When I need the Sawzall for something else, it's pretty easy to just reach in there as long as you've got enough clearance to pop down the button. Each one of these Sawzall is different in how they attach the blade, so you just have to build around that. But I was able to just pop it open, and you pull this, and you can pull the tool out and use it for other things. For storage, if I'm not painting a lot, I just pull the Sawzall out and I just hang it from this end. I've got hooks in the ceiling, and it just hangs up against the wall. It's a little big, obviously, but it's not that bad to store, and it's really nice to use. I think it's pretty rewarding to come up with a tool that you can actually use something that you need that isn't really available in that form on the market, because I did look to see if there was something at the time. But in this case, as with most projects, I have a lot of different things laying around that I just keep extra bits and pieces of things. These angle iron were probably not much longer than they are here. They were just scraps. So ultimately, kind of the design was dictated by what I had. If I had a Sawzall, a jigsaw instead of a Sawzall, I probably would have used that instead, or a drill. I just wanted to use things I already had to create it the best that I could. And in this case, I really didn't have to buy anything. I had all these things, and most of this stuff was just scrap left over from other projects. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested, take a look at some of my other videos. I like doing custom tools and tool modifications, so I've got a couple other videos and more videos on the way. Thanks.